Hello.
Hello. Hello and welcome to our podcast. This is the first episode of
Three White Kids Talking to Black Adults.
Okay, so for this episode of our podcast, we wanted to look at Black digital culture and specifically Black digital resistance chronologically. So we have two interviews that we're going to listen to, and these two people are both intellectuals. They're experts on the subject of being Black on the internet, and we chose these people partly because of their age, because we wanted to learn more about a time period on the internet that we weren't there for, we weren't on the internet for, we were barely even conscious for, which would be the first few years of the internet. And compare it to what we know now, what we know from being on the internet ourselves, what we've learned in the Black Twitter class, and to hear this different perspective.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we're talking to these people as our experts because as we've learned in our Black Twitter class with Professor Clark is that experts don't necessarily have to be scholars or even academics. They're just people that have lived experience. They have the cultural competency to understand the joke, understand the oppression, understand the movement. And so we thought it was extremely key to get some people that were older than us, a little more wiser than us.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we've lived at least most of our lives in a digital era, so it's important to think outside of a digital perspective.
And also, I think the concept of lived experience, making somebody an expert or an intellectual in a given subject is super interesting, especially with phenomenon such as the internet and pop culture on the internet, because it's such a new field of study. And while we've taken a great class about it and learned so much, I think that there's so much more out there that can be learned just from talking to people with said lived experience.
Yeah, and so that's what the hell we did. So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Elle's really dope. She is a Stanford alumni from Charlottesville, born and raised, and she is a bartender/server at the Timberhood Tap House. Elle is not much older than us, but she feels like she's a lot older than us. And she always at work would talk about like AOL group chats and stuff like that, like jokingly, and I was always like, interesting. So that's why I wanted to talk to Elle. Plus, she's like really funny.
You good?
Okay, so what we did was we took the most interesting points from Elle's interview and we broke it down, we fleshed it out, and we're going to dive right in. First, I wanted to get background on her internet usage, and so that's what this segment's going to be on. So you don't have any internet, like, social media currently. Is that because you don't feel like a part of social media? Do you think you're too old for it? Do you think it's
definitely
negative?
I think it can get negative, but I think that's the main reason. Like, I definitely had a Facebook in high school. That was my last media that I had. And when I went to college, I feel like I lost touch with a lot of my Facebook friends that were
like on your Facebook?
Yeah, on my Facebook, which I guess the whole point is to stay connected.
Right.
And I just stopped really scrolling through with interest.
Yeah.
And it became like I didn't add any new friends to it when I moved, so I just...
It became irrelevant.
Right.
Gotcha.
Kind of lost touch. And then there was Twitter, which everybody was doing, and they left Facebook for a second. And I felt like when that kind of progressed into like, I was too late for Twitter. I'd missed
You're never
Twitter
too late
boat.
for Twitter.
How true, Elisha, and I agree. I don't think you're ever too late for Twitter.
No.
To me, the thing is that I have friends of mine that have tried to get into Twitter in the past few years and just haven't been able. They say that they haven't been able to understand any of the jokes,
Right.
or the memes, or the hashtags, or anything like that. And I don't think that it's ever too late for Twitter, but I think that it would take a little bit of work, a little bit of time and effort to get into it and be around long enough to start to see the jokes come back and to make sense to you.
I agree.
To get that cultural knowledge of, and to build your neighborhoods and everything so that you can actually enjoy your experience.
Yeah, it's interesting that she's like, I'm too late, and she's just kind of like, But she doesn't have any, like, anxiety around that. She's not like, oh,
Yeah.
it sucks, I'm too late. She's like, well, it is what it is. I'm too late.
It's kind of refreshing, honestly.
I agree.
Yeah, it's real. Like, Twitter's one of those platforms. I tell people when they say they're not in Twitter, like, you have to want to get into Twitter if you're, at least I think as a white person, you have to want to get in the platform to be in the platform.
And when you're in it, usually you're like really in it, deep into it.
So then Elle brought us to MySpace as one of the platforms that she used. And I asked her about, did she think there was a digital black presence on MySpace? Why or why not? And so this excerpt discusses that with Elle.
I don't think I ever felt like genuine black presence on MySpace.
Okay. And do you think that was a matter of accessibility?
Maybe. I think it was just it wasn't very geared into like social net, like politics. I feel like Facebook and Twitter are avenues of
More political
political
thought.
and
Okay.
MySpace was made for the kids to like post their favorite songs.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you guys ever use MySpace?
No.
I didn't even get a Facebook until I was in 8th grade, so I did not ever. I was barely allowed on the internet. I was only allowed on YouTube under like strict supervision from my mom. I would sneak around a little bit on YouTube and watch, those weird videos that we all watch. But no, I didn't have MySpace.
It's so interesting that, like, the earlier, I guess, quote unquote, social media, I'm thinking of like MTV music videos, how a lot of it had music in it. Like, I know MySpace, she talked about her top 8 friends. And, like, when they got to your profile, it would play, like, your favorite song. I think that's so interesting. I wish we could go back to those days, kind of. I miss the songs. What if your Twitter, like, just bumped your favorite song when someone went to your profile? Force you to listen to my music.
It almost kind of reminds me of Tumblr because Tumblr's more like you have your own page and you make your aesthetic, and I think that's what MySpace was like.
Similar.
I think that it's really interesting that she references Twitter and Facebook as political, like, sources for political thought, because I think that's sort of telling that she doesn't interact with these platforms very often, because I definitely see them as places for political thought, but I view them so drastically different. Facebook is so much heavier on the politics for me.
It is too, but I think that's because of Facebook's algorithm mostly. Because I know even Facebook, if you go into your settings, it'll tell you what Facebook sees you as. Like, if they see you as like very liberal or very conservative, and so I think Facebook does that so users will use Facebook. And I think Twitter, just based on the platform being of like people of color, it's naturally going to be more politicized because people of color are beings that their bodies are political beings, you know?
My Twitter algorithm, or my neighborhoods at least, are very tailored towards politics because I feel like I get most of my news from Twitter, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And a lot of the people that I follow they're not politicians, but they're political activists. So I see mostly it's like pretty one-sided for what I see is the side that I believe in and identify with. But sometimes there's some discussions, but I don't know. I feel like more of arguments happen on Facebook, like political arguments between you and your friends, more than on Twitter, because I think Twitter is more tailored towards what you want to see and what you like and things like that.
And you can't go the hell off. You have 140 characters.
Exactly,
And thank God. And there's a thread, but you have to choose to open that thread and go through the thread. It's not going to just show you a string of 12 tweets. Whereas Facebook, it might have this huge
like an
political
essay,
It's an essay. And it's which I think keeps us away. But it again, for how refreshing Elle is, she's like, it's all too political.
Yeah. So then I brought up memes to Elle. Elle shows me a lot of memes at work, and I wanted to discuss visibility with memes, and I wanted to discuss how that affects people of color and how she feels about that.
I think it's super awesome. I think a lot of it relates to, or the ones that I found funniest or the most, relates to something in black culture that is not that would just ring true with you.
Right.
One I just saw was this black preacher in church, and she's rapping about beans and corn and potatoes and this random Bible story that I didn't even understand.
Right.
Like sitting into an old woman in a church hat rapping about eating food. It just rang true.
It rang true for you, yeah. No, totally.
And I thought a lot of them, if not intended for a black powder, ring true.
So I think there's a lot to unpack here, obviously. The first, I think it was such a great question you asked her about visibility with memes and how people of color are the content of most of the memes on Twitter and online. But it's so interesting that this girl that doesn't use social media basically gives us the definition of an internet meme, that people can pick up the meaning on them and apply them to their own situations. And she talks about that within Black culture without even using it. So they're serving their purpose. They're working.
Right.
I find it like so interesting. I wouldn't have thought that somebody that isn't super versed in being on Twitter or being on the other forms of social media still can relate to memes, and she's still an expert on them in some way, even though she sees them maybe in a different context than the rest of us are used to seeing them. It doesn't affect the way that she can relate to them that much.
And she's literally practicing signifying without even knowing it. She is showing that cultural understanding, which the meme relies on to be affected. You have to decode that message. And she doesn't even have to be on Twitter to be able to decode that message. And we saw that. She's like, I don't even know the fad. Beans, greens, tomatoes, potatoes.
Right. Well, it's also just interesting how she said it came from a news source and how memes are so impactful. They're becoming part of, our day-to-day news. And I think that's just interesting, and, the internet is our news now. It's, everyone's life now, and she's still getting to see that.
I hardly ever see, the news on TV or on cable, but when I do, if the TV is just up somewhere, I've seen this meme as a segment on the news. Right. And I just think that is so crazy. That's just another layer to, one, reaching a wider audience, more accessibility, and two, just adding more cultural importance and meaning to every image or joke or cultural artifact.
So speaking of cultural importance, our next guest that we spoke to So speaking of cultural importance, I said importance. So speaking of cultural importance, our next interviewee's name is Barry Word. He is a UVA alum. He spent about 6 years in the NFL playing for multiple teams, but the reason we wanted to talk to him today is because he is a 55-year-old man. His usage on social media is much different than ours. He gave us a very good historical lesson of sort of what it was like to grow up Black man in rural Virginia and how the internet shaped that upbringing. So without further ado, this is Barry Word. Barry Word grew up in Southern Virginia. He grew up in a very rural area. So one of the first questions that I wanted to ask him, and I got a really interesting response, was, what are your first memories of using the internet at all?
My earliest memory of the internet. Now you have to understand, I'm 55 years old. So I went most of my life without the internet. I went most of my life without social media. So there were no real communities for progressive Black thought. All of our information came from magazines, like I said. Jet magazine, Ebony magazine. These were magazines for Black people. And we would open those magazines, and there'd be articles about Black people. There was Martin Luther King articles. There were Malcolm X articles, and there were, in that magazine they had advertisement in the back. They had clothes that were sold and catalogs, and you'd see the things that maybe you saw on TV that the Jeffersons were wearing or whatever. And that was the only thing that you had that showed you the progressive side of what was going on in the Black community. Because it wasn't in our newspapers. No one was really talking about that. And I'll tell you, my oldest brother, who was 9 years older than I, was the first graduating class, Black and whites went to school together.
I find that so fascinating that the internet, which has now so many different communities, pretty much anyone can find their community on the internet. But in the early days of the internet, or even before the internet, that just wasn't there, and it was so hard to find a community for like different groups of people. So magazines being his go-to place that off the top of his head where he found a community, I just find that so fascinating.
And where he found culture. You know what I mean? He talked about needing somewhere to go to find culture and like to find that. He called it Black progressive thought, which isn't a term we've used, but I think we could adopt. It's a
definitely.
As someone from like Southern Virginia, and I'm from Lynchburg, which is a city, but it's a more rural space. I definitely know what he means by saying like you don't have a community. Like I didn't have a community as a queer person down there. And so what he means, like, it's necessary to find these spaces, online, offline, that just give you, like, at least make you feel like you have a voice.
From queer studies classes, people have said the same sort of thing, that magazines were their sort of first place where they could actually find a community, just as the internet does. It connects people from a bigger group all across the country maybe, or even just a smaller area like your county or your region in the state that you're in. Just, one of the first ways to just be connected to people like you with the same sort of ideas and thoughts as you.
I think there's definitely a word to say here about accessibility. We spoke about this a little more about that, magazine subscriptions come once a month. So you get your culture once a month.
Right.
You get that one time in the month, what's happening that month, and then you have to wait. Whereas today, it's almost like we take for granted that accessibility.
Every second.
Yeah.
Almost like saturation, I would argue, of content and of, media to view and digest.
I can only imagine how important it would make it to only have it once a month or even every 2 weeks if it's bi-weekly issues, just how much you would cherish that, look forward to it, and think about it when you don't have it right in front of you.
And how hard it would be to truly immerse yourself in your culture if you only get it once a month, especially in a rural part. And then at the end, he talked about his older brother being the first graduating class of the integrated blacks and whites school, and just how we're not removed at all. It's so recent.
So recent.
It's hard to accept. And, in Virginia, specifically Charlottesville was where Carrie Buck was born and died. Virginia was a huge leader in the eugenics movement, and just how that trickled down to communities of color and people of color and the more disadvantaged or the less privileged, that they all had to experience the effects of that accessibility.
For us, as we've said throughout this entire episode, growing up in this age, it just, at least to me, it doesn't feel like it was so recent, because at least at first it's taught in history classes, so it just seems so long ago.
So Barry went on to say that the first platform he used, he actually referenced AOL, but then he went on to say the first social media in the modern sense of the term that he ever logged onto was Facebook, and that for him was like that platform where you have those people you don't really want to talk to. And things really got interesting when he started talking about Twitter.
Twitter for me is less intimate. And you're more at risk when you put something on Twitter, because Twitter is rough, man. People say it all the time. Twitter is undefeated. If you put something on Twitter, it better be on point. Otherwise, you're gonna get dragged. I really like Twitter. I get a kick out of Twitter. I laugh more with Twitter because you young people are really, really clever, really clever, and a lot of it. And again, at my age, I missed a lot of the things that you guys the TV shows you watch, all that. So I start to see the humor of like the Office type humor.
Millennial humor.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny. It's really, really funny.
Yeah, let's dive into millennial humor.
The best humor.
Right. A little dry, a little dark.
A little cynical.
Often makes no sense. That's my favorite part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very random. Very random.
It's so interesting. I want to hear you guys' opinion. He says Twitter opposed to Facebook. Twitter in contrast to Facebook, you have to be on point. What do we think about that? Make Twitter casual again? No?
No, that's why I like Twitter. Facebook is the point, like the 140 characters makes Twitter more concise. People have to think about it more, and I appreciate that because I feel like I'm viewing something that someone put at least some thought into. With Facebook, I feel like it's word vomit.
Yeah.
Also, you can't edit tweets, so that adds to that. Like, you got to make sure that it's good before you send it, or like he said, you will get dragged, and we probably all have been. At least I have been.
So it's pressure. The pressure's kind of on.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you can't say it in 140 characters, should you? Or can you figure out a way to say it in 140 characters? But I think that, okay, unpopular opinion, the solution to our country's crisis of the boomer-millennial divide is millennial humor. It's like, look at this guy. He says we're so funny, and it just took him to open up a little bit to be like, once I understood it a little more, it was hilarious. He thinks we're so funny, whereas other people think we're just annoying and it's stupid.
Yeah, humor. I mean, humor is a large point to bring people together, but I think a major point of millennial humor is we make fun of things and we like critique things together. And I think humor, people laughing together and critique is something that is not new to humor, but is a major point of millennial humor.
Yes.
And I don't think a lot of people appreciate criticism as humor.
And not just criticism, but dealing with like serious problems that you have, whether it's mental illness or oppression or any sort of vice that anyone is struggling with, is just becomes humor on Twitter. From like people talking about their own struggles, just joking about it. At least that's how I cope with things a lot of the time.
Right.
And listen to his rhetoric. You're going to get dragged. You have to be on point or you're going to get dragged.
He knows the tea.
He gets it, honey. He gets it. Why can't I feel like if other adults just opened up a little, because, he talks about it. He didn't grow up in this generation. He doesn't understand it.
Right.
But it didn't take much. He's already using the lingo. Like, this guy is hip.
One of my favorite Twitter accounts right now that I follow is cropped boomer images. So it takes like boomer memes and crops them so that they are just hilarious, at least to us. And I'm not sure if the boomers that made those, should I not say boomer? I don't know if that's like
No, you can
a
say
bad
it.
word
No,
now.
you can
but
say it.
if boomers like looked at the cropped boomer images, if they would be like, you know what, actually that is ridiculous and it's funnier now that you're making fun of it.
If boomers adopted millennial humor, it could be the top humor, like the most highbrow humor you could get if they could just figure out how to make fun of themselves. For some context, I have been talking to Barry Word about Black Twitter since this class began, since we started taking the Black Twitter class, and I've been trying to explain to him that Black Twitter is an enclave for multiple communities of Black people. It's a place where they can come together online and understand each other. And I was extremely proud to hear him say this in our interview.
I was on Black Twitter today for the first time, Bailey. It's awesome. It was awesome. One thing that I experienced is that, and you'll see this as you age, and it may not be to the same extent as for me, but I grew up Black. Okay, I grew up in the quintessential Black family. So we as Black people say we are all related. We all know people that know someone, and so we were all raised, at least at my age, a certain way. So there's certain things that we know You don't talk back to your parents. If you do, bam, something's going to happen. It's just the way it is. Now, there's certain things that I see on Black Twitter that I just giggle about that only Black people understand.
I love that he says that he just got on Black Twitter, and I just think that it's funny because we were talking about with this class, none of us thought that we had been on Black Twitter before, but then after learning more about what it is and who's on Black Twitter, pretty much if you're, at least for us, super deep into Twitter, at least me, I've been on Black Twitter far more than I thought, and I think that maybe he has too, so I think that's pretty funny.
Yeah, I mean, he said, like, there are things only Black people can understand, and I think in relation to Twitter, there are a lot of things that I don't get, but I have at least the seeds of knowledge to know some things that are in, like, the neighborhood of Black Twitter, even though I don't consider myself like a Black Twitter partaker. I consider myself more of like a gay Twitter partaker.
I'm a Black Twitter maybe consumer or viewer, like reading and liking, etc. I mean, it's great. It's funny on there. He's not wrong.
And going back to what Elle said, just about how if you're not Black, you won't get it.
Right.
We are Twitter users. We consider ourselves, quote unquote, Twitter experts, you know,
Right.
just us three especially. We use Twitter a lot. So to see someone that doesn't even use this platform like Elle come in and say, only Black people get it. And then to see Barry, who just got it a few years ago and said he just logged on to Black Twitter to say, only Black people will get it. It's such a Black digital enclave. It's so much a part of that Chitlin circuit that just proves its existence.
Right. And that existence is so crucial, and I'm so happy that we have that platform that exists today, because like he said, before that it was just magazines and stuff like that. And it's nice that this connectivity does exist because of how accessible it is now.
And I guess Black Twitter just gained a new follower, if you want to talk about it that way.
And it shows that if Elle ever wanted to, it's not too late
Right.
to hop on,
Never too
because,
late.
I mean, he did it. And if she ever wanted to get an extra community, an extra set of friends, or a new avenue to connect with Black people.
New neighborhood.
Yeah, a new neighborhood.
So concluding remarks, I think it's so crazy. We started off thinking we could just map this out. Let's just talk to people, us, middle-aged, older, and let's just map it out. Let's just see it. It totally didn't go that way.
Yeah, I was surprised how they didn't have the language from the class that we knew, but they did, you know, like
Yep.
I thought I would have to explain concepts to Elle, who didn't have social media, about Black enclaves and media, and Elle was there. She knew, and she's not even on social media. And I thought that was really fascinating and surprising and awesome.
It's like the vindication we talked about. It goes into real life. People
Right.
do get it.
Yeah, and both of them being such different people, such different backgrounds, experiences with social media, still said the same general themes. Like the same themes came up, like you said, the same sort of vocabulary without having taken an entire semester's worth of a class on it. It really is just crazy that they have the same ideas about Black Twitter and Black digital spaces.
And we started, in a class about Black Twitter. It makes sense you start on Twitter.
Right.
And you start at Twitter. But there's so much history behind
Right.
that would almost take up another semester worth of course load.
Right.
And so I think it's a really beautiful concept that we were able to push ourselves to actually speak to this intellectual, to be taught by them. They are our professor in this situation.
Yeah, I almost thought that we would have to explain more to them and then just see what they were thinking. But really, I learned a lot more in this process than I thought that I would have.
Yeah, especially in regards to just early internet and just like Black enclaves before the internet and magazines and stuff like that. I had never considered that before listening to Barry.
It really brings it big picture to more media studies in general.
Right.
And like Black media studies more than just Twitter. And it's just like, it goes so deep. You could just keep going and going.
And especially in media studies, talking about encoding and decoding, we really practiced through this process code switching. We were sort of able to hear what they said, process it within our academic Twitter language, social media language, and then see that message on the other side without them having to have all of those academic terms.
Right. No, definitely. I'm really happy I got to hear both of these interviews. I would like to thank our guests, Elle and Barry.
Definitely thank you so much to Ellen Barry for being willing to talk to us today.
I also want to thank just UVA and Professor Clark in general for this opportunity, because this was super awesome. And thank you to my fellow podcast mates.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Tune in for episode 2 of our next podcast of 3 white kids talking to Black adults.